You are about to learn something that has been kept secret for a long time. I will tell you about 10 lessons on how to survive in the cold that modern people have forgotten. Winter in war is not a landscape or a backdrop. It is a slow, stubborn enemy that tests people every hour. A blizzard erases the glory of victories and parades. All that remains is the ability to keep warm, find a dry place, and not lose strength. Soldiers of World War II knew that warmth was not luck, but a routine of small decisions repeated hundreds of times. There was more ingenuity in these decisions than in the most resounding slogans. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how 10 lessons of survival, long forgotten by the modern city, were born in the icy silence. What if I told you that the main source of heat at the front was not a fire, but a habit that had become automatic? In English battalions in winter positions, warmth began with routine, not with flames. When you took off your gloves, you immediately hid them under your coat because an extra minute in the wind would turn them into useless crusts.
Take a position.
When you took off your shoes, you immediately changed your wet foot cloths without arguing or discussing it. Every movement was part of a quiet ceremony that soldiers performed not for show, but to prevent the night from becoming the longest of their lives. Soviet units on the northern sections of the front kept a dry hour, not as a luxury, but as a duty. After changing posts, the soldiers laid out their wet clothes so that their own bodies would warm them while the tea boiled in mugs. It looked mundane: a greatcoat slightly open, a scarf pressed to the chest, socks hidden under a shirt. But this is how they pulled tomorrow out of the cold, saving their strength for work and marching. There were no grand words here, just the repetition of simple actions. Conversations died down, leaving only breathing and careful hand movements so as not to lose precious warmth. Nothing heroic on their part, but in those few centimeters between their shoulders, the battalion held on. Thus, everyday life became armor. German units, often deprived of sufficient supplies towards the end of the war, followed the example of their enemies and neighbors. Any methods that did not require fuel were used: laying sleeping rolls together, drying fabric on the body, micro-heating from a hot mug that was passed around in a circle. No one argued about whose idea was better. Arguing in winter was expensive. And where ideology ended, the universal logic of warmth began. We deliberately talk about discipline because it warmed us up just as well as a stove. This is not romanticism, but boring yet life-saving repetition. And it was precisely in this repetition that ingenuity was born, transforming a damp dugout into a place where one could survive the night. I'm really interested to hear your point of view. Do you agree that warmth is primarily about order, not luck? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are 9 more lessons ahead that everyone should know. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most underrated weapon on the winter front? The layers of clothing that determine the outcome of the day? British soldiers built up warmth like a construction set. A thin shirt, a sweater, a jacket, and a windproof cape on top. There was nothing victorious about this outfit, but it allowed them to regulate their body heat while marching and retain it while resting. The mistake was simple. If you sweated, you lost the day, so the layers were taken off and put on silently and at the right time. This restraint is not visible on the posters, but it represented a real economy of strength. Soviet soldiers used the old wisdom of foot cloths and scarves, supplementing them with any available lining. A newspaper under a shirt ceased to be news and became insulation, and burlap became a shield from the wind. Where there was a shortage of items, imagination helped. Extra fabric folded in half over the chest saved soldiers from the icy breath of the blizzard. These solutions did not look pretty, but they gave soldiers extra hours of sleep and energy. The war accepted any help, even if it came from a neighbor's bag. Americans in the Ardennes forest valued a scarf and a thin hat more than anyone in a warm apartment. Covering your ears meant keeping a clear head, and a covered neck prolonged your patience. It was important not just to have things, but to exchange them as needed. An extra glove in a neighbor's pocket was not sentimentality, but a calculation for the common good. In winter, individualism melted away with the frost. German units tried to follow the same principles when the frosts were stronger than logistics. A white cape served as both camouflage and an additional barrier against the wind. The main thing was to keep your back dry, because a wet back meant a rough night. Everyone understood that most of the 10 rules of survival sounded boring, but they were the ones that were broken most often. That's where the shocking truth lies. Layers are not a fashion statement, but a language in which the body communicates with the weather. And those who listened carefully gained at least half a step on winter. Which of these techniques do you think is most applicable today? Paper lining, footcloth discipline, or exchanging clothes depending on the situation? Write in the comments, and in the next chapter, you'll learn how to cook warmth when there's only snow and silence around. Guess what warmed better than expensive words about valor? A few sips of hot liquid taken at the right time. British Tommies valued a simple mug of tea as much as a city values electricity. It was not a drink, but a small agreement with the body. Now it will be easier, and you can walk another kilometer. In the pauses between alarms, tea restored the memory of movement to the fingers. And this ritual did not require miracles. It only required attention. Soviet soldiers in the northern forests saved grain and sugar as fuel for the body. Hot porridge did not promise a feast, but it restored the ability to listen to the wind and keep watch. The cold made any food meaningless until it became warm. Therefore, even the rare opportunity to warm up a ration seemed like a celebration of discipline. And it was in such moments that people recognized each other by their voices again. American troops in the cold valued chocolate and dry soup not for their taste, but for the simple math of calories. A bar meant another hour on your feet. Powder meant another conversation with a whispering partner. Sometimes a hot stone, held in their hands or hidden against their chests, saved them until the water nearby reached a tolerable temperature. It wasn't comfort, it was a bridge to the next hour, a small detail that kept them in the ranks. German soldiers, saving fuel, learned to warm themselves around a small source of heat rather than a fire. A sip of hot liquid became a common vaccine against despondency, and it was more important than the loud toasts of a past life. When plans fell apart, a spoon and a mug remained, restoring the ability to think. Winter does not like rough gestures, it respects consistency. And those who remembered this survived the nights. Hot food in the cold is the art of small victories that don't make the news. They don't shine, but they provide reliability that keeps you going. If you like this perspective on history, check out our other videos about the everyday side of war. There are even more forgotten solutions that still work today. This is something you've never seen before. What does rest look like when the ground freezes faster than your thoughts? When the night is not just dark, but dense, like metal. British field shelters in winter were not fortresses, but carefully laid beds made of branches, dry grass, and any fabric available. Every twig, every fold had a purpose. There had to be air between the body and the ground. That thin layer that separates life from numbness. Air became the only ally when the thermometer lost interest in zero. An extra palm's width of height under the back. And in the morning, a different person stood in line. Quieter, more attentive, a survivor not by chance. There was no romance in this geometry of sleep, only training. Even the posture was chosen not for comfort, but to keep breathing steady. The British treated rest as a technical operation. Before lying down, they checked to see if there was a draft from the side, if their shoulder was being pressed, if a branch was crunching under their elbow. Small things determined the outcome of the night. Sleeping in the cold is not rest, but learning to maintain boundaries between the body and the environment. Towards morning, the ground began to even out in temperature, and it was those who had laid their bedding correctly who greeted the dawn without shivering. They knew that warmth needed space, not pity. Soviet soldiers went out into the snow. Snow, which for many was a symbol of cold, became a shield for them. They dug burrows, lined the walls with packed snow, and laid down fir branches, burlap, and boards if they could find them. The main thing was to separate the body from the ice and allow their breath to warm the inner dome. Inside, they spoke almost in whispers, not out of fear, but out of respect for the silence that kept the heat in. A draft in a snow shelter is as dangerous as a bullet. You don't hear it until it's too late. Therefore, all movements were slow and restrained. They even hid their coughs in their scarves so as not to start sweating. Moisture instantly turned to ice, and ice brought back the cold. Everyone knew this, and no one discussed it. At night, the snow seemed to listen. It gave away neither footsteps nor breath. It accepted people inside if they respected its laws. An unnecessary gesture could destroy the balance, and then the shelter would collapse, like a mood. But if you kept quiet, the snow was more reliable than a tree. It had its own logic of peace. Immobility equals preservation. Those who understood this survived even without a blanket. American soldiers in forested areas valued dryness as their main asset. They did not try to fight the cold directly. Instead, they arranged everything so that the cold did not touch them too closely. Raincoats were stretched over branches, and underneath them was a layer of pine needles, moss, paper, anything that created a buffer. Socks were changed without argument, shoes were taken off, insoles were removed, and dry cloth was placed inside. Boots were hung up at night so they wouldn't freeze to the ground. Otherwise, in the morning, instead of leather, they would be frozen solid. All this was done in advance while our fingers still obeyed us. In the morning, there was no time left. Where frost makes every second fragile, mistakes cannot be corrected. Hence the strict routine. Prepare in the evening, live in the morning. The morning minutes were a test of all decisions. If you stayed dry at night, you could move. If not, they moved you. Thus, discipline turned into self-preservation. No one expected nature to take pity. Everyone knew that pity in the frost was an unnecessary luxury. German troops, sheltering in half-ruined houses, used the remnants of civilization against its own cold. They covered the windows not out of fear of light, but to keep the heat in. Any rag, sheet, or sack was turned into a barrier. Flames were hidden because light was the enemy, but everyone needed heat. Kitchen drawers were placed on the floor. Bricks from the walls were used to build temporary hearths. The main thing was for the heat to spread slowly, without burning the air. There was no place for noisy heroes in these improvised shelters. Silence was a form of economy. It kept the walls intact and the air warm. Every nation, every army came to the same truth. Heat is exchange. It cannot simply be obtained. It can only be preserved. Don't lose it at night, and it will return during the day. Warmth is not a gift, but the result of work. It lives between branches, fabric, attention, and patience. And where all these things come together, the night becomes shorter. Sleeping in the cold is not a matter of chance. It is a plan, a test, and respect for the little things. Those who followed them woke up for a reason. Those who neglected them paid with their bodies. The cold does not forgive carelessness, but it respects preparation, and preparation is a form of calmness. On such nights, true equality manifested itself. British, Soviet, American, or German. Everyone warmed themselves in the same way, using all known and secret methods. Everyone listened to the same breath of the earth. Everyone understood that survival is not strength, but order. Do you think that modern city dwellers are capable of living through such a night? Not for show, but for real, without panic, with respect for the cold and simple rules? In the next chapter, we will see why movement in winter is not about speed, but about economy, and how a step can save a life. The cold loves those who rush. They sweat, stop, and quickly realize what they have done. British patrols in the cold chose to walk rather than run because the task was not to get there quickly, but to get there on foot. The seniors set the pace, teaching them to keep their breathing calm. Excessive talking gave off heat to the air, and no one got it back. So silence became a contribution to the common cause. On the Eastern Front, Soviet troops understood the value of a quiet pace. If one person fell behind, the column turned into a ribbon of losses, so the pace was set according to the slowest of the group. Sleds, homemade sledges, and boards for carrying loads. All of this allowed them to work rather than play the hero. Winter ingenuity was simple. Carry less on your shoulders and roll more on the snow. This is not cunning, it is common sense. Americans in the woods in winter learn to stop correctly, briefly and effectively. Immediately put on an extra layer, adjust your scarf, warm your hands on a mug, check your shoes. The pauses were not for rest, but for technical maintenance of the most valuable mechanism, the human being. After such stops, the column did not fall apart, but continued to function as a team. This is how discipline turned a cold day into a manageable task. German units also played on the side of pace and silence in severe frost. The dusty rush of summer did not work here. Here, economy of movement worked. Every step was economical, every command was short, and so a common understanding was born. Winter is not about glamour, but about meticulousness. This is perhaps the most important lesson. Those who conserve heat on the go do not ask for miracles from the night. This is not victory, but a competent distribution of forces. And this math applies to far more people than it seems at first glance. You cannot cheat winter, but you can systematically outplay it. This is exactly what those who made it through did. A secret passed down from generation to generation. Warm your hands and feet, and your head will start to think more clearly. The British valued mittens over thin gloves, warmth on the outside, dexterity for small tasks on the inside. Taking off the top layer for a minute doesn't mean you're left with nothing. This sandwich allowed them to do their work without paying for it with numbness. And it wasn't a whim, but a system. Soviet soldiers treated dry socks as ammunition for survival. They changed them on cue, dried them on their bodies, and guarded them as part of their combat readiness. Lubricating their feet with protective ointments was not seen as grooming, but as armor against the cold. Timid thoroughness was expensive here. Only the strong could afford it, and the strong remained strong longer. American soldiers monitored their shoelaces as strictly as they monitored guard duty rotations. Too tight meant the cold was stronger because blood couldn't reach the feet. Too loose meant moisture and snow would get in where they didn't belong. Balance was achieved not with words, but with daily attention to the feet, and that attention was reciprocated. German troops treated every dry piece of fabric with care in the cold. An extra insole in a boot blocked moisture, and a small bag of warm grain warmed the palms before a shift. It didn't look heroic, but it made it possible to hold a rifle confidently. Hands that don't shake from the cold are half the battle. Such simple things restored control. Hands and feet are the final destination for warmth, and it must not stop there. Do you agree that it is in caring for the little things that true resilience is born? In the next chapter, you will see how the color white turned into invisibility in winter, and why it saved us no less than fire. Winter loves the silent, and white fabric makes a person almost a shadow. British units pulled simple white capes over their dark uniforms, and the forest around them seemed to close its eyes. Against the backdrop of snow, silhouettes disappeared, leaving only the rustle of footsteps. Camouflage was not a trick, but a courtesy to one's own chances. And the simpler it looked, the better it worked. Soviet soldiers in the northern regions valued white robes and sheets, which were turned into raincoats. There weren't enough for everyone, so they were shared, exchanged, and sewn on the spot. An extra strip of fabric over the face hid the shine of the skin and the breath. The snow accepted such people as its own, and their own survived more often in winter. Americans operating in forest areas often used white sheets to cover equipment and boxes. The snow contours then ate away at the corners, and the enemy's gaze slid past. Even a tent covered with a white sheet became part of the hill. It was not a miracle, it was competent modesty, and modesty led to silence. German units also used white cloaks, especially where open fields left no chance for dark spots. The white color leveled the difference between a person and a snowdrift, leaving only patience. And patience is the best camouflage of all. So simple fabric did the job of a whole battery of tricks, and it did it reliably. In winter, fire is not only warmth, but also the danger of being seen. British soldiers appreciated a small, hidden light that did not give them away beyond the nearest bush. They hid the flame like they would hide a letter, deeper and deeper. It was not important whether the fire was bright, but whether it was visible to those who should not see it. This understanding saved them from unnecessary questions. Soviet units used quiet sources of heat so as not to disturb their fragile camouflage. In dugouts, the light was covered with cloth, and cracks were sealed with rags so that there was no breathing to the outside. Hands were warmed over a small flame, not over a fire, and this restraint gave rise to endurance. Endurance kept you warm longer. Americans, finding themselves in a snowy forest, preferred short windows of warmth, after which everything was carefully extinguished. Warmth was needed right now, but traces were never needed. Everyone knew that smoke was an invitation that was easy to refuse in winter. That is why the fire was polite, compact, and neat. This way, comfort did not turn into a signal. German units, saving fuel, reduced heat to a minimum and increased its usefulness. The fire was not supposed to compete with the wind. It was supposed to work. And if it worked quietly, it meant that another day had been lived correctly. The whole point was in this simplicity. Winter appreciates those who do not make noise. Cold destroys order faster than a shell destroys habit. British sergeants kept order in winter like an anchor. Wake up, inspection, change of guard, tea, foot check. It was boring, but it gave meaning to every hour. When the steps are clear, the cold becomes a task, not a sentence, and people endure it longer. Soviet units in the cold relied on short rotations at their posts. 15 minutes, and you are replaced without being asked, "How are you doing?" Dry clothes and warm words awaited you in the dugout. Such an exchange made the night bearable. A bearable night is a morning already won. In the blizzard, the Americans distributed warm duties as carefully as combat duties. Someone heated water, someone watched the entrance, someone collected dry wood chips for shelter. Sharing the burden meant sharing the cold, and each part became bearable. In the end, everyone worked not heroically, but reliably. German units in the cold stuck to their routine as tightly as they stuck to their equipment. Order is an inner fire that cannot be seen from the outside. It does not illuminate, but it warms from within. Where it exists, winter lingers, and that is enough. In winter, those who remember the little things win. The British kept their flasks upside down so that ice would not form where they needed to open them in the morning. It seemed trivial until one day they needed to drink. Trivial things save lives. And this is a truth proven by thousands of hands. Soviet soldiers slept with the things they needed to work in the morning close to their bodies. Batteries, maps, gloves. Anything that could freeze was kept warm with the person. The morning did not begin with regrets. It began with action, and the day went more smoothly. Americans tied their scarves so that their breath would not soak their collars. Moisture always means cold, which will return later. A scarf is a filter that preserves heat from your own mistakes. No magic, just an understanding of cause and effect. And that understanding restored confidence. German soldiers working with metal carefully wrapped cold objects in cloth before picking them up with their bare hands. Skin and ice don't mix well, but fabric makes them neighbors rather than enemies. 5 seconds of preparation save 10 minutes of pain and hassle. In winter, that's a great trade-off. And all of these are lessons that never grow old. We have collected 10 winter lessons from the everyday life of World War II soldiers, British, Soviet, American, with a few German examples. There are no grand speeches or brilliant gestures, just practical human ingenuity that keeps warmth and hope alive. Which of these lessons do you find most useful for today's life? Layers, routine, quiet, warmth, or sleep discipline? Write what you want to hear about in the next videos. Maybe the summer heat at the front, night marches, or field life in the mountains. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about how ingenuity helps you survive when the weather's against you.